In China, authorities are battling one of the worst droughts seen in more than 50 years. Falling river levels have left hydroelectric power stations unable to produce enough energy.
Beneath the shimmering waters of the South China Sea, China's audacious engineering feats rise from the ocean floor. Artificial islands forged from ambition, geopolitics, and sheer defiance of nature. These mega projects, built on unstable seabeds and encircled by shifting tides and rising seas, are monuments to a nation's determination to reshape reality. And they show no sign of slowing down. China is building an insane artificial river. Yes, you heard that right. This is one story you can't miss. Hang tight as we explore the ebb and flow of this artificial river. China's geographic and demographic challenges. China spans approximately 9.6 million square kilometers, making it the fourth largest country in the world by area. Yet, despite this vastness, its geographic advantages are unevenly distributed, leading to complex developmental challenges. The eastern and southern regions, especially the Yangtze River Basin, are rich in water resources, fertile soil, and mild climates, enabling dense populations and robust agricultural and industrial output. In contrast, northern and northwestern regions such as Inner Mongolia, Xinjiang, and Gansu face arid conditions, severe drought cycles, and rapid desertification. The Gobi Desert alone expands by about 3,600 square kilometers each year, steadily encroaching on arable land and rural settlements. More than 94% of China's population, over 1.3 billion people, live in the eastern half of the country, despite Western China accounting for about 57% of the landmass. This population imbalance has long worried Chinese planners, prompting aggressive state-led initiatives to redistribute people and economic activity. You wouldn't expect these kinds of problems in China, but here we are. Interestingly, the Chinese have adopted a very ingenious approach to the matter. Programs such as the Go West strategy, launched in the year 2000, have aimed to populate and develop China's western interior by offering economic incentives and investing in infrastructure. However, many of these regions lack essential natural endowments, especially water and arable land, making sustainable development difficult. Water scarcity is one of the gravest issues confronting the nation. China holds just 6% of the world's freshwater resources, yet it supports nearly 20% of the global population. The World Bank has classified China as a water-stressed country, with per capita freshwater availability falling below 2,000 cubic meters annually, less than a third of the global average. The imbalance is stark. While southern provinces like Guangdong and Yunnan enjoy over 80% of the country's water, the north, including key industrial hubs like Beijing, Tianjin, and Hebei, must make do with just 20%. This geographical mismatch has forced reliance on massive engineering projects like the South-North Water Transfer Project, the focus of our video today. Water scarcity also threatens industries critical to China's economy. Hydropower, which generates about 17% of the country's electricity, relies heavily on consistent river flow from southern watersheds. Meanwhile, northern coal-powered plants, agriculture, and growing urban centers are placing intense pressure on already depleted aquifers. In some regions, groundwater tables are dropping by more than 1 meter per year. Without sustainable management and long-term adaptation to these hydrological realities, China's ambition to achieve balanced growth and energy security will remain highly vulnerable. But the nation is not one to take things lying down. Response to water scarcity, artificial waterworks. In a country where nature has long dictated the rhythms of life and development, China has opted for confrontation rather than concession, launching one of the most ambitious hydraulic engineering projects in human history to resolve its growing water crisis. The South-North Water Transfer Project, first proposed by Mao Zedong in 1952 and formally approved in 2002, seeks to reroute vast quantities of water from the Yangtze River Basin in the humid south to the parched industrial and urban centers of the north, including Beijing, Tianjin, and the North China Plain. This colossal megaproject, spanning over 200 kilometers in its eastern route alone and costing upwards of $80 billion, is envisioned to eventually transfer nearly 45 billion cubic meters of water annually across three major corridors, eastern, central, and western, requiring the construction of tunnels, reservoirs, canals, and pumping stations. It is a much bigger deal than it sounds. The scale is simply unprecedented. The logic behind this bold maneuver is striking in its simplicity, yet monumental in its defiance of natural limits. If water doesn't flow where it's needed, then China will make it. However, this engineering solution, while technically brilliant, carries substantial risks. Entire ecosystems have been disrupted, millions of residents relocated to make way for canals and dams, and regions once water abundant are now exposed to new patterns of stress. The western route, still in planning stages due to its extreme geological challenges, would require drilling through the eastern edge of the Tibetan Plateau, one of the most seismically active and ecologically sensitive regions in the world. Moreover, by transferring water across long distances and dramatically altering its natural flow, China is gambling with the complex and often unpredictable behavior of hydrological systems. Just as with the artificial islands in the South China Sea, the assumption is that engineering prowess can override environmental fragility. Yet if rainfall patterns shift due to climate change, or if southern rivers experience prolonged droughts, already a concern given glacial retreat and erratic monsoons, the entire water redistribution system could become not only unsustainable but catastrophically counterproductive. In seeking to bend nature to its will, China may be building monumental infrastructure on hydrological foundations that are far less stable than they appear. The idea is actually not new. Back in the late 1950s, under the iron-willed leadership of Chairman Mao Zedong, China launched what would become one of the most radical and disastrous socio-economic campaigns in modern history, the Great Leap Forward. Officially beginning in 1958, the initiative aimed to catapult the country from an agrarian economy into a global industrial power in just a few years, using sheer manpower as its primary engine. Rejecting the conventional pace of industrialization, Mao envisioned a nation where even peasants could become iron and steel producers overnight. Backyard furnaces were erected in villages across China, with millions of farmers melting down scrap metal, often including their own tools and cookware in hopes of meeting unrealistic production quotas. The state also reorganized rural life into vast communes, collectivizing not only farmland but kitchens, childcare, and even private property. These changes dissolved traditional family units and disrupted the centuries-old rhythms of agricultural labor. If it sounds like a disaster, that's because it was. As millions of able-bodied workers were diverted from farming to steelmaking and irrigation projects, China's food production plummeted. Yet propaganda insisted that grain yields were reaching historic highs, prompting the state to requisition excessive amounts for urban centers and export, leaving rural populations to starve. Between 1959 and 1961, the country descended into a man-made famine of biblical proportions, exacerbated by severe droughts, floods, and the sudden withdrawal of Soviet technical and financial aid. The result was catastrophic. An estimated 30 to 45 million people perished from starvation, overwork, disease, and political purges. In provinces like Anhui and Henan, mortality rates soared as entire villages were wiped out. At the height of the crisis, some regions saw death rates of 68 per 1,000 people annually, numbers more commonly associated with war zones. Despite this colossal human toll, the Chinese Communist Party never officially condemned the campaign. On the contrary, the Great Leap Forward was later reframed not as a failure, but as a necessary ideological experiment, proof that societal transformation could be pursued even in the face of suffering. The campaign's legacy became a blueprint for future state-led projects, reinforcing a mindset that the will of the party and the nation could and should override the constraints of nature, economics, or basic human needs. In the wake of the Great Leap Forward's catastrophic fallout and amid growing ideological fervor during the Cultural Revolution, the Chinese Communist Party launched another sweeping social engineering campaign, up to the mountains and down to the countryside. Initiated in earnest around 1968, the movement aimed to address the mounting urban population crisis and the perceived ideological decay of city life by forcibly relocating millions of urban youth to remote rural areas. While officially framed as an opportunity for young people, many of them recent middle school and high school graduates, to learn from the peasants and embrace the hard, purifying labor of agricultural life, the policy functioned less as a noble agrarian experiment and more as a tool of political control and demographic redirection. In reality, it stripped entire families of their children and left the young, often teenagers with no practical farming experience, to live in poor, unfamiliar regions with minimal state support. Over the course of the movement, more than 16 million young people were exiled from cities like Beijing, Shanghai, and Guangzhou to underdeveloped provinces such as Inner Mongolia, Yunnan, and Xinjiang. Among them were many former Red Guards, once the vanguard of Mao's Cultural Revolution, now considered ideologically problematic after the internal chaos they had helped unleash. Their relocation, in many cases permanent, was a way for the state to neutralize potentially volatile political actors and simultaneously relieve overburdened urban infrastructures. Life in the countryside proved harsh. Many youths faced malnutrition, disease, forced labor, and cultural isolation, cut off from both the economic opportunities of the cities and the traditional communities to which they had no real connection. With educational and professional trajectories upended, their future prospects evaporated. By the time the policy was gradually dismantled in the late 1970s, a large segment of this forcibly displaced population had been left behind in rural limbo, having missed out on the economic reforms and upward mobility that began with Deng Xiaoping's rise. Today, many of them are collectively remembered as China's stolen generation, a term that encapsulates the profound psychological, economic, and cultural displacement they endured. But China is not an impoverished nation struggling for survival anymore. The dragon has stirred with all its might. This brings us to the focus of our video for today: the Haihei-Tengchong Line and the South-North Water Transfer Project. Few symbols capture the delicate and enduring tug-of-war between China's geography and its developmental ambitions as starkly as the Haihei-Tengchong Line, which is an invisible diagonal that runs from Haihei in the northeast to Tengchong in the southwest. First proposed in 1935, the Haihei-Tengchong Line continues to reveal a lopsided truth. East of this boundary lies just over one-third of China's landmass, but hosts more than 94% of its population. West of it, a vast expanse of mountains, plateaus, deserts, and steppe makes up nearly two-thirds of the country, yet houses a mere 6%. This geography defines the gravitational center of China's economic activity, agricultural viability, urbanization patterns, and political concerns. And perhaps nowhere is this imbalance more profoundly felt than in the case of water. China is an arid country masquerading as a water-rich one. Its total freshwater resources, approximately 2,800 cubic kilometers annually, might appear ample on paper. However, these are distributed unequally, with about 80% located in the south, especially along the Yangtze River Basin and the subtropical monsoon-fed provinces of Hunan, Guizhou, and Guangdong. In contrast, the heavily industrialized and densely populated north, including major cities like Beijing and Tianjin, and critical agricultural provinces like Hebei and Henan, struggles with chronic water scarcity. By the early 2000s, northern China had less than 500 cubic meters of water per person annually, well below the internationally recognized threshold for severe water stress, which is 1,000 cubic meters. Entire rivers began to run dry for significant portions of the year. Aquifers were overdrawn and sinking, and the country faced the threat of environmental collapse in some of its most strategically important regions. Mao Zedong, as early as 1952, had recognized the deepening divide in water availability. He famously declared, "The South has plenty of water, the North lacks it. If possible, we should borrow some." It was a deceptively simple idea, spoken at a time when the People's Republic of China was barely 3 years old. But the traumatic legacy of failed megaprojects like the Great Leap Forward, combined with the political upheaval of the Cultural Revolution, meant that this vision was shelved for decades. It wasn't until 2002, half a century later, that Mao's concept took concrete shape in the form of the South-North Water Transfer Project, or SNWTP, the largest water engineering initiative ever attempted in human history. Designed to redistribute water from the Yangtze River system to the arid plains of the north, the project comprises 3 massive canal systems, eastern, central, and western routes, spanning thousands of kilometers. The central route alone, completed in 2014, stretches 1,432 kilometers from Danjiangkou Reservoir in Hubei province to Beijing, and has an annual transfer capacity of nearly 9.5 billion cubic meters of water. The eastern route, which began partial operations in 2013, utilizes a series of upgraded and newly built canals, locks, and pumping stations to deliver water along a 1,050-kilometer path following the ancient Grand Canal. The western route, still in the planning and feasibility study stages due to its staggering technical complexity and high elevation, would involve tunneling through the eastern edges of the Tibetan Plateau to redirect water from the upper reaches of the Yangtze to the Yellow River Basin. The rationale behind this megaproject is clear. If natural hydrology won't cooperate with the needs of economic and demographic reality, then China will simply re-engineer the landscape. The SNWTP serves to bolster water supplies for over 40 cities in the north, support agriculture, maintain flow levels in northern rivers, and reduce the over-extraction of underground water reserves, which in places like Beijing had reached critical levels. Yet, for all its impressive scope and engineering prowess, the project is far from a silver bullet. The costs have been steep. The central and eastern routes have required the displacement of over 400,000 people, the flooding of ecologically sensitive zones, and massive landscape alterations that have disrupted both local ecosystems and historical settlements. Water quality has been another issue. While the Yangtze carries vast quantities of water, it is also one of the most polluted rivers in the world. Ensuring the delivery of potable water to urban centers hundreds of kilometers away requires extensive purification infrastructure, further inflating costs and complexity. Additionally, the project is enormously expensive. By 2020, China had already spent over 500 billion yuan, which is roughly $75 billion, with total projected costs likely to exceed $100 billion. And the full western route, which is the most hydrologically ambitious and geopolitically sensitive, as it involves the upper reaches of transboundary rivers that flow into Southeast Asia, is still mired in planning debates and international concerns. Still, despite its challenges, the SNWTP is a response to real, inescapable pressures. Northern China is the country's breadbasket, growing the bulk of wheat and corn. It is also the beating heart of China's political machinery, with Beijing not only as the capital but also as a symbolic center of national unity. The water stress experienced in the north isn't just a local inconvenience, it's a potential national crisis. Some hydrologists have even warned of water-driven collapse scenarios if groundwater depletion were to continue unchecked. The SNWTP is not simply a matter of economic optimization, it is a survival strategy. And yet, as this titanic infrastructure slices across provinces and ecosystems, the philosophical questions it raises are hard to ignore. Is it sustainable to maintain population densities and industrial activity in regions that natural water cycles do not support? Can technological prowess continue to outpace the environmental consequences it generates. In the same way that the Heihei-Tengchong line outlines a stubborn geographic truth, the SNWTP illustrates China's determination to redraw that truth through sheer willpower and engineering. But while water can be moved by canal and pump, the underlying problem, a mismatch between population centers and natural resource distributions, remains unresolved. Moreover, even west of the Heihei-Tengchong line, where only 6% of the population resides, that small fraction still translates into tens of millions of people, many of whom live in water-scarce, infrastructure-poor, and geologically volatile zones. These regions are home to a diverse mosaic of ethnic minorities, many of whom have historical grievances with the central government. Ignoring their water and agricultural needs creates not just an ecological risk, but also a potential political one. Infrastructure development in these areas, whether through direct water transfer or local water management solutions, remains a daunting and sensitive challenge. In this sense, both the Heihei-Tengchong line and the South-North Water Transfer Project operate as lenses through which we can understand China's long struggle with space, scale, and sustainability. One is a passive observation of enduring demographic geography. The other is an active intervention aimed at rewriting the story. Together, they reveal a country perpetually negotiating between the limits of nature and the aspirations of its leaders, sometimes with ingenuity, often with unintended consequences, and always with monumental stakes. Though ambitious and unprecedented in its scale, the South-North Water Transfer Project has so far been largely regarded as a qualified success. Despite concerns over ecological fragility and the risks associated with rerouting such immense quantities of water across entire provinces, no major environmental disasters have emerged in its wake. The canals have operated with relative stability, the water has flowed mostly as intended, and cities like Beijing have gained a much-needed cushion against the pressing threat of water scarcity. In a nation with a long history of ill-fated mega-projects, this lack of catastrophe alone has been taken by many as a sign of prudent planning and successful execution, bolstering the project's reputation within official circles and state media narratives. However, the price tag attached to this achievement is steep. The cost of the South-North Water Transfer Project is nearly double that of the already colossally expensive Three Gorges Dam. The Chinese government has to fund not just the physical construction of canals, aqueducts, pumping stations, and treatment plants, but also the complex relocation efforts, environmental mitigations, and ongoing operational expenses. And unlike the Three Gorges Dam, which generates electricity and thus offers a stream of revenue, the SNWTP is a logistical infrastructure initiative with no built-in mechanism for profit. Water is delivered, not sold at a rate that recovers the cost, and much of the long-term funding relies on state subsidies and cross-provincial fiscal cooperation. Even with those factors taken into account, many within China's planning apparatus still regard the money as well spent, particularly when compared to other big-ticket ventures, such as the construction of artificial islands in the South China Sea, which carry immense geopolitical and military value but do little to address the daily needs of China's citizens. In contrast, the SNWTP is seen as a life-sustaining civil investment, its benefits visible in every functioning faucet and irrigated field in the north. Still, beneath the sheen of technical triumph lies a deeper financial unease, particularly among local and provincial governments that were roped into the funding of this monumental endeavor. The model behind the project's financing has leaned heavily on decentralization. While the central government provided a significant portion of the funds, the provinces of origin, those whose rivers and reservoirs were tapped to feed the canals, were expected to share in the financial burden and, more importantly, take on the ongoing responsibility of maintaining the environmental quality of their water sources. For regions like Hubei and Henan, this has become an enduring dilemma. These provinces now shoulder the dual obligation of curbing pollution and regulating industrial activity near their water sources, yet receive no proportional increase in revenue for the role they play in securing water for other, often wealthier, regions. As a result, a growing chorus of local officials has begun to demand formal compensation for what they call ecological services, a recognition that their natural resources are being commodified for national use without any local reward. The push for compensation isn't just rhetorical, it's rooted in tangible economic pain. Many of the donor regions along the SNWTP's central and eastern routes are also home to valuable mineral deposits and energy resources that require substantial water input to exploit. Now, with stricter water conservation policies in place and physical limits on local usage to preserve the quality and volume of water headed northward, these areas are seeing a decline in revenue from what were once their core industries. Mining operations have scaled back or relocated, industrial expansion has slowed, and the hope that these regions would experience a development boom of their own, fueled by the same water that now flows to Beijing, has begun to dim. This emerging discontent highlights a core paradox at the heart of the project. While it solves an urgent problem in the north, it risks creating a slow-burn crisis in the center. By diverting not just water, but opportunity, the SNWTP threatens to deepen the already pronounced regional inequalities that have long plagued China's internal balance. The very same Haihe-Tengchong line that illustrates the demographic divide also casts a shadow over the political and economic tensions lurking within the donor-recipient framework. Beijing's taps may now flow freely, but in cities and counties hundreds of kilometers to the south, local leaders grapple with stagnant development, resource restrictions, and a growing sense of being left behind in a national story they helped enable, but from which they now feel increasingly excluded. The project's success, though undeniable in terms of functionality, is laced with trade-offs that ripple far beyond pipes and canals. Whether these trade-offs can be fairly addressed without sparking wider disillusionment remains an open question. What is clear is that as China pushes forward in its quest to master nature, it must also confront the quieter, more nuanced demands of equity, compensation, and the unglamorous business of maintaining consent from those who pay for progress. But the project is far from complete. The Red Flag River. While the eastern and central routes of the project have made substantial progress, the western route, also known as the Red Flag River project, remains largely incomplete, with construction barely beginning. This route was envisioned to divert a massive 60 billion cubic meters of water annually from the rivers in the Qinghai-Tibet Plateau to the northwest, particularly to the isolated Xinjiang region. Xinjiang, one of China's largest and most arid regions, has long struggled with water scarcity, which has exacerbated challenges related to agriculture, industry, and population growth. The project's goal is to alleviate these pressures by channeling water from the resource-rich south to the arid northwest. However, the route itself presents a host of unique challenges that make it vastly different from the eastern and central routes. One of the primary difficulties lies in the sheer scale and complexity of the terrain involved. The western route is designed to traverse the rugged and remote landscapes of the Qinghai-Tibet Plateau, an area known for its high-altitude terrain, extreme weather conditions, and isolation. Constructing the necessary infrastructure to transport water over such vast distances and difficult terrain is a monumental engineering challenge that requires highly creative and specialized approaches. Building canals, tunnels, and reservoirs in such inhospitable conditions is a delicate task, as it demands not only cutting-edge technology, but also careful planning to minimize environmental impact and ensure the safety and reliability of the infrastructure. Despite the significant engineering challenges, the goal of the Red Flag River project is to provide a stable water supply for one of China's most economically important but ecologically vulnerable regions. Xinjiang, a landlocked area situated in the far northwest of China, is home to large-scale agricultural production, including cotton farming, as well as mineral extraction and manufacturing industries that require substantial water resources. For years, Xinjiang has been relying on water from underground sources and limited rivers, but these supplies have been insufficient to sustain its rapid growth. The Red Flag River project is therefore seen as a necessary step to ensure that the region can continue to develop. However, the environmental concerns surrounding the Red Flag River project are substantial and far-reaching. The source rivers in the Qinghai-Tibet Plateau, specifically the Yangtze and Yellow rivers, are some of the most ecologically fragile and sensitive bodies of water in China. These rivers flow through some of the most remote and pristine areas of the country, providing water to a host of important ecosystems and species that depend on their natural flow. Diverting water from these rivers could have serious and lasting consequences on the local environment, potentially disrupting fragile ecosystems and threatening biodiversity. The rivers in the Qinghai-Tibet Plateau are not only ecologically sensitive, but they are also a vital source of water for millions of people in China, especially in the eastern and central parts of the country. Diverting water from these rivers to the northwest could lead to a depletion of resources in areas that are already experiencing water scarcity, raising concerns about the long-term sustainability of such a large-scale diversion. While the goal of the Red Flag River project is to provide relief to Xinjiang, the project could inadvertently exacerbate water shortages in other parts of the country that rely on the same rivers. This kind of water redistribution could potentially create new ecological and social challenges, as regions that were previously well served by these rivers could find themselves facing their own water crises. Another significant concern is the potential for damage to the fragile ecosystems of the Qinghai-Tibet Plateau. The region is home to unique plant and animal species that are highly adapted to its high-altitude environment. Diverting water from the region's rivers could disrupt these ecosystems, altering water availability for native species and potentially threatening their survival. Furthermore, the plateau is a critical part of the global water cycle, playing a key role in the regulation of freshwater resources for both China and neighboring countries. The magnitude of the Red Flag River project cannot be overstated. The proposed diversion of 60 billion cubic meters of water annually represents an enormous volume of water, which is more than the combined annual flow of several of China's major rivers. The scale of this project is comparable to the largest water management initiatives in history, requiring vast infrastructure investments and unprecedented coordination between government agencies and local authorities. However, the enormity of the project is also what makes it so controversial. The potential environmental consequences, coupled with the immense engineering challenges, have led many experts to question whether the project is truly feasible in the long term. One also has to contend with broader questions about the sustainability of China's mega infrastructure projects, particularly those aimed at managing the country's water resources. The South-North Water Transfer project, including the Red Flag River route, is part of a larger trend of engineering solutions to China's growing water crisis. While these projects have made substantial progress in alleviating some water shortages, they have also introduced a range of environmental, social, and economic risks. The political and economic implications of the Red Flag River project are also significant. Xinjiang is a region of strategic importance for China, not only because of its economic potential, but also due to its geopolitical significance. The region is home to numerous natural resources, including oil, natural gas, and minerals, and its development is seen as critical for China's future economic growth. The Red Flag River project is not just about addressing water scarcity, it is also about securing China's long-term economic and geopolitical interests. The project's success or failure will have far-reaching consequences for the development of Xinjiang and the broader northwest region. In any case, the project reflects the country's willingness to invest heavily in infrastructure to support its growing population and economy. However, the environmental and engineering challenges associated with such a large-scale water diversion project raise serious concerns about its long-term sustainability. The ecological fragility of the Qinghai-Tibet Plateau, the risk of creating new water shortages in other regions, and the potential disruption of local ecosystems all highlight the unresolved risks of China's mega-infrastructure water strategy. As the project moves forward, it will be critical for policymakers and engineers to carefully consider these risks and explore alternative solutions that can balance economic development with environmental protection. The Red Flag River project is still in its early stages. For now, all the world can do is wait. Well, that's it for now. Thanks for watching. Did you like this video? If you did, please consider liking, dropping a comment, and hitting the subscribe button so that you don't miss out on our new uploads. Also, don't miss this video you see on your screen right now. It's truly unbelievable.